Hello everybody and welcome back to another video from the Theory of Racelessness. Before the clip, we have some very exciting news. Dr. Sheena Mason, Dr. Carlos HOYT, and Greg Thomas present Resolving the Racism Dilemma, a full-day conference coming up this September 24th, 2022. Register using the link in the description box down below to experience these leading voices as they explore and discuss how to correct the misguided notions of race. Now, enjoy the video.
For women or against women, ignoring the fact that a person can be unaligned and not be against women. They could just be, for all intents and purposes, against feminism, or at least view feminism as not the right framework for them, right? So I sit in the unaligned space. And I bring this reference up because it makes me think about how people in the US, they tend to apply their racialized framework or their understanding of racism to then every other country. And then they see racism everywhere when they're looking through this framework. And I really question the validity of the assertion that racism is everywhere, that this thing called anti-Blackness or white supremacy is everywhere, because based on what I know, I feel like that's part of racialist ideology having its way with us. Because if we believe that it is everywhere, that it is therefore inescapable, then that's going to inspire how we manage it in our own nation and how we view ourselves if we move throughout the world, if we're privileged enough to be able to do that. And I'm thinking back to my conversation with Mobile, Eric, when she spoke about her hesitancy to just label everything as racist or any instance as a form of racism, because she was talking about how she's come to think more critically about the whole thing, and that the migrants who come to Ireland who might experience some form of discrimination, she really questions, is it racism or is it racism or is it something else? Is it the fact that they're migrants, right? And I feel like that thread of her thinking came through and what you've said so far, because, and I think it matters to ask oneself, is it racism or is it xenophobia? Is it something else? Because again, it's this idea of not wanting to misidentify the problem in a way that makes the problem seem far more nefarious and expansive than it is necessarily. And I think also if we're misidentifying the problem, then that's going to hinder our ability to actually solve and resolve the problems. Because, something I think about and do a lot of research on is, if I go to France, for example, if I go to Paris, there are a lot of African American writers who lived there as expats, and they preferred the French not because the French didn't have any biases or don't have any biases, but because they were afforded the privilege of being American over there. They weren't hyphenated American and they weren't considered Black, because racism with the capital R doesn't necessarily transfer neatly or travel neatly to other places. But in the same country, you might have some people from Ethiopia, right? Or Eritrea or whatever, South Africa, Nigeria, come from the continent of Africa to France, and they experience discrimination. And then the question for me, at least, becomes, is that racism? And I don't have any firm answers because I don't know everything yet. I can't possibly know everything. And I'm constantly learning and thinking through these ideas, but the question is on the table is that racism? And again, I would just say our response matters, because then our ability to problem solve, I think, is hindered if we are misnaming it.
Yeah, phenomenal point, Dr. Mason. Really important point too. I'll firstly address two other points before I get to the final one, because I think that final one is worth extrapolating. The point you mentioned in regards to identification, what the problem is. Firstly, in terms of American ideological interpretations of racism being imposed or introduced into other countries, that certainly is not, despite the fact that there were positive externalities to the BLM movement, it doesn't mean that our discourse has not been greatly stained by kind of American interpretations of terms like anti-racism and even racism. I know Charles mentioned the prejudice plus power definition of racism. A lot of my friends who are Black in Ireland would hold on to that definition, despite the fact that I spoke to you about it, Dr. Mason. I think it actually doesn't do any service to the idea of Black empowerment that they're supposedly holding on to this definition on behalf of. I mean, if prejudice plus power equals racism, that means I don't have power if I'm not if I can't be a racist, and that means my goal is to be able to be a racist. And of course, there are questions of how do we define power? Is it political power, spiritual power? And when am I able then to be a racist? Like, what point am I allowed to be a racist at? Is it when across the world there are like 50% white political leaders and 50% of Black political leaders? Are we predicating it on other metrics? So I think it's quite a regressive way of thinking about it. And in our conversation, Dr. Mason, I didn't elaborate on this point well, as well as I would have liked to in retrospect, but I talked about Baldwin criticizing the Nation of Islam in the USA, James Baldwin, in talking about how they criticized the idea that America was a hegemonic white entity. So when America, being that, conceptualized God, it was a white God that many racists or many white Americans at the time he was writing The Fire Next Time imagined. And Baldwin praised the nation for criticizing the idea of a hegemonic singular white God, but criticized the Nation of Islam for replacing that white God with a Black God, because you're committing the same sin when you engage in such rhetoric and ways of thinking about what is the dominant hegemonic structure that we should try and actualize. So the idea of Black people not being able to be racist seems to feed into this sin too, because then the tables might top, and then white people might not be able to be racist. So I think it's like an infinite kind of regress or loop or cycle that leads to absurdity. So in Ireland, anyways, with discourse, I'm seeing a lot of influences from the likes of D'Angelo and Kendi and the like. And I actually appreciate it in that different alternative ways of thinking about the issue are being introduced. But I think if that's the case, we need the theory of racelessness, and we need the likes of King and Baldwin also to be introduced into Ireland in regards to how we see issues like racism, or there is no counterbalance. And I actually think we could lead ourselves to the same cul-de-sacs and hiccups that are being met in America in regards to race. And if we identify Irish racism in an American way, we might actually transplant a lot of American issues to our nation that are not in any way unique to the unique Irish experience. The next point you raised about identification, actually staying on this point, I don't know, I'm sure you've all seen Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility. I read it, I read it last year, and I was, of course, deeply disheartened because it was an international bestseller. I was expecting lots from it. And I think there was a lot of logical fallacies within the book. But she said at the start of her book, to speak to your point, Dr. Mason, that this thesis of mine can apply across the Western world where there are white people and Black people. I wrote it for America, but it can also apply across the West. That, of course, includes Ireland. And if we took her approach to things, not only would it not be compatible with an Irish approach, it could actually lead to a lot of harm and a lack of progress in regards to race relations, based on my estimation. So just to your point, I think it's dangerous for us to think in a singular way, to the example you used about the feminists going to Africa, about issues like race and racism. We have to appreciate the nuance specific to very particular nations in regards to this situation. Lastly, the point about identification. It's a phenomenal point. I actually had a conversation with my German housemate last year about this, and she was saying to me that she felt she held racist views when she was younger against people who came from Turkey because of a negative interaction that she had with a man who came from Turkey who mistreated her or called her a slur when she was 11. And she said, but some of my best friends were from Turkey, but I still had stereotypical views about Turkish people. So I didn't know whether I was racist against Turkish people, seeing as my best friends were from Turkey, or whether I was, I had an anathema for people who tended to come from particular places and looked at me in a particular way because I had a bad experience with somebody from that group. And then we started talking, and we continued with our conversation. And she said, Eric, you're an educated person. You're nice and you're easy to talk to. Another person who may be Black, who may not be as nice to talk to, who may not be a very nice person, could be called, let's say, the N-word or discriminated against. But how do you know if it's based upon the other attributes to that person? Or how do you know if it's fundamentally based upon the color of their skin, especially if that person treats you nice? to your question, are we diagnosing the problem accurately by considering all of the ancillary factors, or are we concluding in a way that is similar to how a lot of us think in the cultural silo that we're in right now? So it's a really important question. And I do think we need to be more sophisticated in how we identify issues pertaining to discrimination and ostracization and mistreatment of people. Or else, as you said, we might include in the mix a lot of issues that are unrelated to some of the problems that we might identify. So yeah, it's definitely worth thinking about.
Yes, thank you. That was man, this is why I love talking with people.
We hope you enjoyed that highlight. To watch the full version, use the link in the description box down below. Before we go, here's another reminder for Resolving the Racism Dilemma with Dr. Sheena Mason, Dr. Carlos HOYT, and Greg Thomas. We highly encourage you check out the great things being offered at this conference, September 24th. All of the conference information is linked down below. We hope to see you there.